We are live here. There we go. And now the broadcast is live. Hello, people, as you start to trickle in. Thank you for joining us today on The Mighty for another edition of Mental Health Month 2020. My name is Justine Sones. I'm a stress management and self-care coach. And today we're going to be talking about self-care and boundaries and managing your mental health. And all of that good stuff. So this is something that I am really passionate about and have been working on for several years myself. So I'm hoping that today we can just kind of talk about a few terms, definitions, get clear on what we're referring to when we talk about things like boundaries and self-care and stress and anxiety and worry. All of those terms that can be used kind of interchangeably. So hello, Cynthia. As we wait for everyone to get settled, I'd love if you just say hi in the chat. You can let me know where you're from or what inspired you to sign up for this today. What is your current situation right now in the whole pandemic mode? Are you working from home? Are there kids there? Tell me what's going on in your life, and we can just kind of see how this conversation shakes out today. So I will share a little bit about myself while I wait for this all to get going. I am on the west coast of Canada in beautiful British Columbia. As I said, I work as a self-care and stress management coach, and I also do a lot of writing. So I am very grateful that my career has been virtual for quite some time, and it hasn't changed too much since this has all hit, which is really, really great. But I know that not everyone is that grateful or that lucky, sorry. So so I spend a lot of my days writing, and I have 2 boys and 2 dogs and work from home and manage all of that chaos. And yeah, let's see what else we have going on here. We have Lauren, you're a social worker working from home. We have Eric, a mental patient working from home. This is great. Hello, Cynthia. Amazing. Okay, well, again, we're still just gonna kind of wait for this to get going, but I would love to hear from you also. What are your favorite ways of taking care of yourself right now? How do you manage your anxiety? Let's get going with that kind of stuff. Essential retail worker enjoying her off day. Way to go, Suzanne. And also way to take time for yourself on your day off. This is great. And then Monica. Yeah, lots going on here. All right. Well, let's get started here. If you guys do have any questions or comments, like I said, just drop them in the chat here on the side, and we'll get to them as best as we can. Again, Justine Sones here, self-care coach, and I help people with stress management. I got my start in a career of wellness and stress management about 11 years ago when I was working as a massage therapist. So I started doing that work because I really cared a lot about helping people feel better, which just seemed like a really simple thing. But my interest in massage therapy actually started when I was quite young. I think I was probably like 8 or 9. And I remember giving my mom a foot massage for some reason. She just had this like lotion bottle, whatever. I decided to give her a foot rub, and she loved it. And seeing the way that she could just relax into that moment and really enjoy herself is really what spawned this passion for helping people feel better. And so I kind of went through college, did that for my profession for a few years. And what I really started to learn was that helping people feel better wasn't just about the physical touch of the massage therapy, but it had a lot more to do with the conversations that I was having with people and the space that I was holding to help them really process their stress and talk about the things that were keeping them up at night. And by holding that safe space for them, as well as giving them the tools to kind of deal with the stress over the course of their day-to-day, that's really where my work had the greatest impact. So what's really wonderful about that is that it allows me to take the, magic of being in a massage room and really carving out that time for yourself and making it more widely accessible for the general public. Because things like massage therapy, seeing your acupuncturist, your chiropractor, all of these used to be parts of our self-care routines that were really important. And now they've kind of been taken away from us in light of all of this stay-home economic shutdown. So what I really want to do is help us get, more creative about how we're rethinking our self-care routines, the tools that we're putting in our arsenal, and really the way that we're managing our stress and our mental health through this kind of uncertain time. So what I want to start with today is really getting clear on what I mean when I use specific terms. So we tend to talk about things like stress and anxiety and worry and really use them interchangeably without getting really clear on what each one means. And in my work, kind of taking that step back and identifying what you want to manage is really the first step to putting together a routine that's going to work for you and work with the changes of your life. So when we talk about something like stress, first of all, these, negative emotions that we tend to try to avoid, they're really, really normal and they're really healthy. They're actually the way that our body is trying to protect us, to keep us safe, all those good things. It's just sometimes they get, a little out of control and don't really work the way that they're supposed to. So in a healthy state, stress is the physiological experience in your body when you feel threatened. And so that could be something very literal, like you're worried that a tiger is going to hunt you. And so from an evolutionary perspective, your body says you need to get your muscles tense so that you can jump and escape, or your heart rate needs to increase so that you can deliver more blood to your muscles. Your breath is going to increase so that you can get more oxygen delivered to where you need it. And so all of these mechanisms are your body's way of taking care of yourself and helping you deal with the threat. Where this becomes problematic is when the stress trigger isn't actually going away. And the other thing is that our body can't always tell the difference between real threat and perceived threat. Either way, it kind of creates that physiological response that tries to help you escape. So I often find that by identifying that you're feeling the stress in your body and saying, thank you, body, I know you're trying to protect me. Is this something that we actually have to, jump to DEFCON 9 here? So with that in mind, when we feel that stress response starting to get activated, that like tight chest, that shortness of breath, then finding ways to kind of like combat it and bring that stress level down is really where the self-care response is going to be the most effective there. So that's one thing that we're talking about here, is when we deal with stress that comes up because we feel threatened, okay? And the second part that I want to talk about with this whole mental health self-care thing is this concept of worry. Because stress is going to be something that is a normal part of your day. It's not going to go away. So we really just have to learn to manage it. And it's similar with worry, except that where stress is a very in your body response or reaction, worry exists a lot in your brain. And it's especially, a negative narrative that tends to play. So how this will show up is if there's something that, triggers you or causes you to feel threatened. Let's say that it's, your child is throwing a tantrum because you asked them to clean up their toys and they don't want to. So they start screaming and throwing things around. So the stress response says there's something really loud that's happening and it's kind of making me crazy. And then what can happen with the worry is that it could say, if you're in a not healthy place, I'm a bad mom. My kid hates me. This is, I'm not good at what I'm, trying to do, which is parenting. And when we're healthy, we're able to kind of check that worry and say, hey, is this true? Yes or no, and kind of put it in its place. But when we're not healthy, then that worry can start to spiral and really take control of the way that we're showing up in our life. Now, where this really gets problematic is when anxiety settles in. And the way that I view anxiety is that's where the stress in your body and the worry in your head they're on this really vicious loop that it's having trouble breaking. And so you feel tense, you get the reaction, you tell yourself a scary story about it. And then because you're telling yourself a scary story about it, you get really tense and react in your body. And instead of being able to create that space to, calm down, come back to center with yourself and react from a place that is, more appropriate, we react from this really high level place. So in the work that I do, when I talk about things like setting boundaries, and creating the space for self-care, what I really mean is carving out the time and space for you to process the stress and the worry so that you can disrupt the anxiety cycle that starts to spiral. So that's really what I want to talk about today. And where, this all links into burnout, where this all really stacks, is that, again, when we are, in a healthy place, then the stress of, everyday life is always going to fluctuate up and down because, again, this is normal. Stress is a normal human experience. So let's say that normally we kind of like hover back and forth between stress and recovery and stress and recovery, okay? And so as these stress triggers start to hit us, if we feel stressed without recovering, then it ends up stacking, stacking, stacking until we are feeling incredibly depleted and heading towards burnout. And that's where things really start to become problematic. When we talk about managing our mental health, the way that has shown up in my own personal life and personal story is that when I have a good and healthy self-care plan in place, then my mental health is also managed. It means that, my depression doesn't flare, my anxiety doesn't flare. But again, when I neglect those self-care needs, when I'm not processing what comes up in my body, when I'm not challenging the negative narration in my head, that's when I'm more prone to flares of mental illness. So what I really want to encourage you to do is examine what's the experience that you're having with your mental health and what are the specific self-care practices that are going to help you manage those things. So if there's any questions about any of that so far, again, go ahead and drop it in the comments. I just want to make sure that we're all really clear on the difference between, when I'm talking about stress, when I'm talking about worry, and when I'm talking about anxiety. And how all of those play together. So any questions, drop them in the box. And there's going to be time for kind of a Q&A at the end of this, but otherwise I'll just kind of keep moving along. So in the spirit of also continuing our definition game here, another term that I really want to bring some clarity to is this concept of boundaries, because just as we all know that we have to have good self-care practices, we also know that we have to have good boundaries. But we don't always know what we mean when we talk about boundaries. So one of my favorite definitions of boundaries comes from Prentice Hemphill. And he says that boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. So when we're making this correlation between boundaries and self-care, we're really talking about, again, creating that space for you to heal. And in a healthy dynamic, let's say that there's a trigger that causes your stress, worry, anxiety to flare, and you identify it and say, okay, I need to take some space to process this. That could be going for a walk. It could be taking a hot shower. It could be any number of tools that we have in our self-care toolkits. And those are healthy ways to process the feeling. So that we can, approach the situation in a better way going forward. So if those boundaries are set when we're in a place of being healthy, when we are not healthy, then we're more likely to respond with defense mechanisms. So if boundaries are able to protect you while also taking care of others, what defense mechanisms do, which is what we're more likely to engage with when our, anxiety, stress, worry levels are really high, then those defense mechanisms are engaged, yes, to protect you in theory, but they also do damage to other people. So Within the stress response, the sympathetic nervous system, that fight, flight, or freeze response, that's what we're really talking about being amplified by these triggers. So when your defense mechanism is activated, that fight can look like lashing out, whether that's with your words or with your body, which is obviously not healthy. You can also engage in flight, which is kind of like just leaving without actually creating any resolution. And there's also freezing, which is just totally, shutting down, holding your tongue. And none of these reactions, while they temporarily help you in the moment, they don't actually take care of yourself, your needs, and others in, a bigger picture way. So the self-care practices that I want to talk about in order to help with this anxiety, worry, and stress buildup is really about creating those healthy boundaries so that you have space, whether it's time, whether it's physical space, or whether it's, an emotional boundary, like saying this is unacceptable, like a verbal boundary. But all of these will create space so that you can kind of find quiet and process what's really happening. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. And so let me see here. There's a question here from Karen. She says, I understand worry leads to stress, leads to anxiety, but outside of that paradigm, how are you defining worry? So I look at worry as kind of it's your brain's attempt to problem solve for you. So if your feelings in your body are kind of telling you, like giving you a sense of your safety, and feedback about the actual physical environment, the worry or that narration in your head is your brain trying to make sense of it. And so that is healthy because it's important to approach our problems and say, okay, what can I do about this? What could I have done differently? What did feel really good in my action? That's all a healthy process to a limit. But where this kind of worry starts to become a problem and no longer serves you is, again, when it's really spiraling or when the narrative that you're listening to isn't actually accurate. So we sometimes take for granted that the voice in our head, if we have an internal narration, not everybody does, but we sometimes take for granted that the story that we're telling ourselves is true, whether or not it is. So worry in an unhealthy expression is going to take the worst version of that story and it's going to play it over and over, not in a way that's helping you problem solve and do something more effectively, but in a way that's actually stressing you out more and doing more harm than good. So that's where, when it comes to our self-care practice for physiological stress, then things that decrease the firing of the sympathetic nervous system are going to kind of bring you back to your neutral middle ground. When it comes to worry, having the ability to tune into that narration and question whether or not it's true, real, of service is the difference between putting worry in a healthy and boundaried container versus kind of letting it take over. So let me know if that helps, Karen. So perfect. And then let's see here. Okay, awesome. Yeah, lots of nods to people knowing that they need to have self-care. So, and Karen, definitely issues with letting go of the past. I feel you. And so it's really interesting because the way that we really build this emotional intelligence and our reaction to what's going on is based on what's happened in the past. So our experiences are important to learn from and carry forward. But again, it's the difference between putting those experiences in your backpack and actually like trudging along with them versus looking at them and saying like, hey, do I really need to bring like a wine decanter on this backcountry trip? Like, probably not. That's not really going to help me. So we're not going to put it in this bag and we're going to go on without it. So the ability to, again, reflect on what's happened, examine what served you, what didn't serve you, what's helpful, what's not, and then carrying those forward is how we're really going to be able to create that like roll with the punches, sustainable self-care plan and strategy that's going to support you through all of this. So What I want to do now is, oh my goodness, there's a comment here about I put my past into a balloon and watch it float away. And I love that so much because I also find that when I'm trying to put some perspective on, my thoughts about the past, then having those visualizations can be really, really helpful. And especially finding ways to, if you're in like to a little bit of the woo side of things, like I am, finding ways to connect the elements to those visuals can really help. So it can be something like, put your past, put your worries, put your whatever into a balloon and like watch the wind carry it away. Or imagine that they are like leaves falling down from a tree into the stream, and the stream is carrying the leaves away. There's all of these tools that are available to us that can really integrate what we think is happening with what's really happening, and put it in its place. And yeah, this next comment about journaling actually segues really well into the next thing that I want to talk about, which is kind of looking at the different ways that we can manage these components of our stress, our worry, our anxiety in healthy and appropriate ways. So the comment here is journaling to remember what works and that each moment is new. So I mentioned at the beginning that I do a lot of writing in addition to my work as a self-care and stress management coach. And, that really, I've always enjoyed writing as a way of like, self-expression and all of that stuff. But there was something about in my self-care and recovery journey with my mental health and postpartum journey that writing and journaling gave me the space to make my thoughts real and actually sift through them. So what would end up happening, especially when I was in an anxiety loop, is that my brain would get stuck on a really kind of like simplified version of what was going on. So it could be something like, this is too much, this feels bad. This is too much, this feels bad. And while those things are true, they aren't actually helpful in sorting what's going on and processing that worry. So the practice of journaling and allowing myself to have a safe and unfiltered space to just brain dump, it was a really, really effective way of taking these like intangible thoughts, making them real, putting them on paper, and then I could read them and say like, is this true or is this not? Because it was a lot harder for me to make sense of that in my head. And then even if I wasn't able to distinguish, what was the truest form of reality in my notes, it at least helped me to articulate it so that then I could take those thoughts to people that I trusted and kind of play that like true or not game. And when you surround yourself with people who, love you and want the best for you, they are going to be the first people to challenge that evil narrator in your head who is really quick to point out all the ways that you are not enough. So yeah, journaling, writing, any form of creative expression that creates a channel for you to move what you're thinking in your head and what you're feeling in your body and lay it out in front of you to examine is going to be a really, really healthy way to, process that emotional or mental turmoil that you don't always have a physical sign to give proof to. So yeah, journaling is one of my favorite ways to do that. There's also, again, like having healthy avenues for external processing as well as that internal processing. So, talking about those feelings with your friends or with a therapist or with your doctor, all of that are really helpful for reining in that narrator. And then when it comes to actually processing the physical stress in your body, one of my favorite ways to tackle this conversation is really looking at, is the self-care act appropriate to the feeling that you're trying to process and manage? So I had a really great conversation with a friend the other day where she was talking about feeling really, really frustrated and, recognizing that she needed some self-care. And so she went and took a bubble bath for 45 minutes. But instead of feeling like it really like relaxed her and allowed her to be more present, she actually ended up feeling more agitated because, what happens when you put rage or frustration in hot water is it stews. And so, there's an attempt of like, of processing that negative feeling, but it's not something that actually meets the need of the feeling. So, um, so when I talk about or think about processing these physical feelings, I really like to encourage people not to shy away from expressing big feelings in big ways. Okay. Because feelings are a really interesting thing. We've really been taught to ignore our feelings, or that they're irrational or they're not worth listening to, and we do ourselves a major disservice when we diminish them because our feelings hold so much information and so much power. They are how our experiences in life become real in our body and how we really carry them forward in our lives. So what we often end up stuck in as far as a negative cycle, especially being in close quarters right now, um, is that we often have to kind of like choose our battles and suppress those big feelings for the sake of a greater good, whether that is not yelling at your children because they're children but they did frustrate you, or not raging on your partner because they left the laundry beside the hamper instead of putting it in the hamper. Sometimes we don't blow up in those moments because it's not only not helpful, but it's also not socially acceptable. So what we do is we tend to kind of like suppress those stressful big feelings that we have in our body. But if we're suppressing them in that moment for the sake of keeping the peace, and we don't actually come back to release and express them, then they end up stacking in a really negative way. And then we end up losing control of it. So rather than suppressing our feelings, ignoring the feedback that our body's giving us, and waiting until it's too late and it spills over, then I am a huge advocate for setting aside and creating a container for expressing big feelings. So for me, my favorite way to do that is what I call rage singing. And so I like to go into the car, I'll go for a drive, crank the radio. Well, actually, no, not the radio. It's a playlist with songs that I know almost all the words to. So I turn that loud enough that I cannot hear myself singing because I do not have a voice for singing in public at all. So I like to turn it really loud, and then I sing as loudly as I can and dance as safely as I can in the car. There's a lot of hand movements. There's a lot of, head back and forth. And the combination of being able to vocally actually express my frustration, pick a song that mimics the things that you feel, being able to say the words in a more eloquent way than I could because song readers are so gifted at that, having the feeling of the music actually in my body, and the deep breaths that it really takes to attempt to hit those high notes. All of those actions together are incredibly therapeutic for releasing those feelings. And what's really wonderful about this specific act is that it can be incredibly beneficial in like 15 minutes or something. It does not take long to be able to effectively process big feelings, because what I often end up seeing a lot, and how people are really headed towards that burnout, is that it's not just that asking for time for yourself or prioritizing the self-care feels kind of indulgent, but it also feels really unattainable from a time perspective, especially if you have one partner who's home full time with kids and the other partner's gone all the time at work, and then you cross paths at the end of the day really briefly, and both of you are tired, and you really try to do something generous for the other person by continuing to just do the things, when the reality is that asking for 15 minutes to just remove yourself and feel the feelings is going to go such a long way in being able to actually show up for the people in your life and the things in your life that you really care about, without showing up on that I'm 9 out of 10 on my anxiety scale and not operating at my best self. It's like these little efforts over the course of the day can stack and bring you down bit by bit to somewhere that's more reasonable. because I know that when I get to a place where I'm feeling really depleted, what my brain says to me is like, I want to have a weekend at a spa. I want to be removed from all of the madness and I just want to be by myself. But that's not always realistic because, I have a family, I have a job, I have responsibilities into real life. So rather than going to this defeatist place of if I can't do all of the things, I'm going to do none of the things, I just find it really helpful to identify all of these levels of things that can help you feel just a little bit better at a time. So it can be like rage singing makes you feel 7% better, and then taking a really hot shower makes you feel 6% better, and then washing your sheets and climbing into fresh linens at night, that might make you feel another 4% better. And so we can really add all of these little things into our self-care arsenal and work with what's available to us right now. Sarah's asking which songs are on my playlist. So it's a little embarrassing because I am a bit of a Taylor Swift fanatic. So there's a lot of Taylor Swift on there. There's a lot of Alanis Morissette. Christina Perri is like the Love Strong original CD. That's really dating myself there. I also really love Beyonce. Like anything that is like, if I feel like the song was written from a really honest place, and like I feel like, like I talk about the way that I use writing or recommend using journaling to process, and for so many, celebrities and artists and creators that we look up to, it's very similar. It's like they use their craft as a way to process, and the songs that end up really resonating and helping to move those feelings through are the ones that are written from that like really raw and vulnerable but healed place. So I would say that when you're building out your own playlist, look at the experiences that you hold near and dear and look for artists that can capture that for you. And then those are going to be the songs that are going to help you do the feeling and do the processing and get all of that moving through your body. So so I hope that helps. And one of the things that I was just thinking about when I was talking about that was, specific self-care related to defense mechanisms is what I wanted to come back to. Because, I mentioned that when we are reacting from a place of being really stressed and instead of having those healthy boundaries that create loving space for healing and reconciliation, then the defense mechanisms that tend to show up are, the fight, flight, or freeze. So that can be lashing out, that can be numbing, that can be shutting down, anything like that. So when I talk about creating that, 15-minute appointment to like feel the feelings, if your tendency is to lash out this mechanism, then doing something that involves really intentionally lashing out may or may not be the antidote that you need. Because, for people whose defense mechanism is to shut down, bottle up, then absolutely, that's an avenue that's really helpful for creating that balance. If you find that your tendency is to, flee or to lash out or to do something that's, high energy, out, avoidant, whatever, then your 15 minutes might be better put to use by sitting still and being quiet and doing something that doesn't allow you to respond in a defensive way that you're used to doing. So that can look, like trying to sit in meditation. Maybe that's not your thing. I'm not great at meditation. It can be, taking a hot shower or a bath. Like maybe that's when it's a good time for you to slow down, or maybe going for a slow walk where, you are with your thoughts and you're not trying to distract yourself. So there's just different ways to kind of approach the self-care tool that you want to employ. But either way, that practice really starts with the pause to notice, like, this is my reaction, this is where it's coming from, and this is the thing that I can do about it. Okay? So that's kind of the process that you really want to start. And once you can identify those steps, then you can get a lot more intentional about what the actual tools and tricks and whatever you're doing to support yourself through that. So I'm going to do a little check-in here, see how everyone's doing with all of that. If there's any other questions here, feel free to pop them in. Let's see here. Monica says, I have a handle on making sure the kids in my charge at work take space, demand their boundaries be respected, and focus on self, yet I don't practice these things with myself. I've got to do a better job and assert my rights. Absolutely. And here's something that's also really, interesting, important. I'm not sure what the right word is here, but about the whole, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, is that humans are really sensitive to when others say something and then do another thing. And we're a lot more attached to what people do than what they say. And so even if we are really good at, asking others to, or suggesting that others, recommend that others do take care of themselves, set these healthy boundaries, put themselves first, as soon as we don't do it ourselves, then that's what they're going to pick up on and are more likely to respond to and model what is, demonstrated for them rather than just what they say. So, absolutely, yes, it's so important to be teaching people, kids to do this, to have these practices. And it always has to start with you first. We always make the changes with our inner self, that inner circle, and then, let things kind of go out from there. Kristen, I'd love to hear a little more about what your issues with boundaries are, because that can, take a lot of different shapes. And so maybe we can answer a few of those things, because it's like, are these unhealthy boundaries ones like, are you letting people walk all over you, or are you saying yes when you should be saying no? I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that shows up. Suzanne, it is a lot to take in, but you can always find me and revisit the work. My website is justinesones.com. There's a blog there with a bunch of articles about this kind of stuff. And you can also sign up for my email newsletter if you want. It's called The Friday Feels. It goes out every Friday. And it's these, more like letter form, friend to friend, sit down with a cup of tea to consume these emails. But you can sign up by, if you're in the States, texting 33777, the word The Friday Feels, one word. Or you can go to bit.ly/The Friday Feels. And both of those options will get you signed up. And then you can kind of continue to revisit this information, this conversation, and learn it over time, because, setting boundaries and stress management techniques, self-care tools, these are all things that we practice over and over. It's not like you do it once, set it and forget it. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. It's like you have to do it every day. You have to do it, get into a habit. And then that investment is really going to pay off over time. So, here's Karen's, how do I have boundaries when others depend on me and need me? We're all familiar with that cliche of, you have to fill your own cup first. You can't pour from empty. You have to put on your own oxygen mask. And one of the things that really brought that into light for me was, when my kids were really young, I really struggled with my boundary setting and self-care practices, because, again, these little infants were completely dependent on me, and I had to keep them alive. But, when you're on a plane, when we used to go on planes, and they say, put your oxygen mask on first, it's not just about the act of putting yourself first so that you can help people. It's also that your child, your baby, the grown individuals who are on the spectrum that you're responsible for, they aren't capable of putting their mask on and then helping you. And so, because you are the one that is has the responsibility, then as much as it feels like you can't put yourself first when someone else needs you, it's that you have to put yourself first, because if you don't, then you aren't going to be there to help them and to take care of them. And I mean, the reason that we put other people first is because we care so much. It's like we don't sit here and think like I'm gonna let myself run myself ragged, like I don't care about myself. It's that we do care so much about them, but it's flipping that script and to just practicing over and over that you have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of them, because that's your responsibility in this dynamic, in this relationship. And lack of healthy boundaries is always going to affect self-care, because if you don't have those healthy boundaries, then it means that you don't have a practice of creating space to heal. Because again, it's about having that trigger that comes in that causes your stress, worry, anxiety to spike, being able to hold it at a distance and say, okay, I'm going to process these big feelings so that they don't stack. I'm going to write them down so that I know what I'm actually thinking and feeling. I'm going to sit with this so that I don't react from a place of, impulse rather than being really thoughtful. So, okay, Monica's asking, how do you handle boundaries with a parent, even though you're an adult and you still want a relationship with them? Oh my goodness, this is so, so, so hard. Your immediate family is the hardest when it comes to setting boundaries, and especially with the parent-child relationship, because those are our oldest ties, their most ingrained boundaries. And yes, unfortunately, you do sometimes have to sever ties in the effort to set a healthy boundary, because what we do when we're setting this boundary is we're creating the space to say, this thing had this effect on me. So this event happened, the dishes didn't get put away, you bailed on a birthday. I don't know what the trigger would be, but it happens, and that creates a reaction in us where we tell a story about it. We have to take that space, process our hurt, process our story, come back to the relationship, and then say, this is the thing that I need for our relationship to move forward in a healthy and productive manner. The thing is, once you put your need out there, it's the responsibility of the other person to uphold it. And so that's where you have to meet each other in the middle in your relationships. So if you take the step of setting a boundary, let's say that your parent has really, really big opinions about your life in a way that really isn't appropriate, then you can communicate to them and say, I appreciate that you love me and you want what's best for me. And the way that you're interfering in my relationship, in my work life, in my whatever it is, isn't acceptable for these reasons. What I need from you for this relationship to work is X, Y, and Z. And then it's up to them to meet you there. And if they aren't able to meet you there, then you have to decide, what does that boundary look like? Does it mean that you'll only answer phone calls once or twice a week versus once or twice a day, So yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you're dealing with parents, with siblings, but part of that growing up process is, and I mean, we're all hurt little kids on the inside. But part of that growing up process is being able to accept which relationships, which people, which dynamics you really want to have in your life, which ones are helping you to become a better version of yourself, someone that you want to be around, who's helping you live the story that you want to leave as your legacy, and then it's your responsibility to surround yourself with people who are supporting that best, healthiest version of you, and to set boundaries around the people who aren't nurturing that in you. And again, it's not easy. It's never easy, but that's part of why it takes practice, every day, in and out. And one of the things too that I just want to bring up here, because Karen says I'm the mom, kids are grown and out but still needing me. Kristen says it has to do with the environment that I grew up with. Absolutely. And one of the things that can be really tricky about the whole setting boundaries conversation and taking ownership is that we all have equal responsibility for what we bring to the relationship, like I said, which means that when your boundaries are constantly being violated, it's because you're giving people permission to do that. And we give that permission because we're getting something out of it in the moment. So if I'm, trying to set this boundary or expectation with my children that they're, doing more cleaning up after themselves, let's say, so that it lessens the load that the domestic work takes on my bandwidth. If I decide to do it anyway and, violate that boundary that I set because they're putting up too much resistance, then I'm giving in and over functioning for them because it's easier for me. Okay. And if I can acknowledge that, then at least I know what I'm dealing with. But it's not that I am, a passive martyr in this whole experience. It's that I'm actively choosing to let my boundary down so that I can have an easier time with something. And sometimes that can be that we like getting the validation from people. If, we feel like people ask too much of us at the last minute all the time, but we're always giving in. It might be that we really enjoy swooping in and saving the day. And there's something to, own about what we get when we do let people cross those boundaries. So, and Carolyn, your opinion, can you start over at 61? You can always start over. You can start over every minute. You can start over every day. It's that kind of cliche, like every moment's a new one. And so I think that what's important in there to remember is that all of our habits are put in place by the collection of all of our experiences up until then. So someone who's starting this work at, 18 has 18 years of that experience that they're trying to rewire, and so, you may have 61 years of experience that you're trying to rewire, but that also means that you have this vast amount to draw upon, to examine, to look at, when you started letting your boundaries down. When did you decide that this is, how you wanted to show up? And then again, once you're able to name that thing and look at it for what it is, then you're able to do something different. And know that, again, it's a practice. It's something that, like, you want to celebrate the wins as they show up. And you also want to have a lot of compassion on yourself when you maybe don't perform according to what you thought your expectations were going to be. Because, really, this is something that, like, you're setting the rules here. This is your game. You're the one playing it. And it's up to you to set those metrics of success and those expectations for how you're going to show up within it. So each new moment is a new balloon. So that's amazing. And also, Kristen here, like, I really crave validation. We all crave validation, okay? We are social creatures. We are wired for connection, for validation, for love from each other. And so that's a very, very healthy thing to want. Where it becomes unhealthy is when our entire sense of self-worth hinges on what other people think of us, because that's not something that we can control. And that's where, again, that worry, that internal narrator can really run wild and take us places that aren't healthy to go. So being able to, again, just set those boundaries, create that space, honor yourself, own your story, and know that in it all, you are worth taking care of. As much as you think that others are deserving of your time, your energy, your love, your investment, you are as deserving of all of that. And not just deserving, but kind of need it. So, Okay, we are heading towards the end of our time together already. I cannot believe it. That just flew by. I hope that everybody, learned a little something here. Again, if you were just kind of tuning in towards the end of this and missed the beginning, then feel free to pop back and give it a rewatch, because I just kind of went over, when I talk about stress, what that means, when I talk about worry, when I talk about anxiety, boundaries. And then the rest of the conversation is really just kind of tying that all together with giving you some tangible ideas for ways that you can, manage those things in your life. Yeah, there we go. This is great. Okay, awesome. Well, again, if you have any follow-up questions or want to learn more about my work, like I said, you can sign up for my weekly email. It's called the Friday Feels. You can text the Friday Feels, one word, to 33777, or head to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/the Friday Feels. So thank you so much for being here today, everyone. This was just such a wonderful conversation, and I'm so grateful to be a part of it. So thank you, and be well.